Okay, let's continue our discussion of the education of Augie Merasty and look at Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is titled Sisters of the Night. And in this chapter, Augie talks a little bit about um, two sisters, one in particular who uh, beats him. Uh, she inflicts very harsh punishments, and I think David Carpenter is doing something. Uh, I have to assume that the names of the two sisters are chosen ironically because one is named Mercy, one is named Joy, and these two sisters are nothing but, harsh and cruel in their punishments and completely have no mercy when they're beating the children and have a complete lack of joy, I guess, when of what they inflict on the children. So I think that he's naming them uh, ironically. At least that's my assumption. But and then the very first sentence of chapter 7, Augie describes how he says, "Me and my fellow reprobates were made to kneel on the cold cement floor of the playroom long after everyone else had gone to sleep is lost in the span of time, but I know it was many times." Um, so he acknowledges that, there was so many times that they were made to kneel on the cold cement floor. And he uses the word reprobate. That you might, if you're not familiar with that word, I would say, look up any words that you're not familiar with in the dictionary. Um, it's just something to do when you're reading a book and you're not sure what that word means, is to look it up. But he uses that word, and if you do look it up, you can, it's a suggestion that he and the other students are seen as worthless, as immoral, as uh, degenerates, as just people who are not worthy uh, or worth human life. So he acknowledges that that's how they were viewed by the two sisters. And I think the extent of Augie's vocabulary is kind of impressive as well. We get words like reprobate and emeritus of immorality is what he called Johann Verwelkind. So that's maybe another little glimpse of his residential school education, was that, part of that did it affect or influence his grasp of language and his skill and language. So, um, his education is shown in that way, but it tells us that he's, a very intelligent, sensitive uh, writer and thinker and philosopher. So there's something to him that just goes beyond maybe his surface, how he first appears to people when they first meet him. Uh, and then he talks about, he describes in this chapter some of the harsh conditions that the children were forced to endure. And he says, "When I was at the school, it always seemed to be winter time. The days of that time always seemed to have been colder. Maybe it seemed so cold because we were so scantily dressed for winter. One pair of socks, one pair of thin wool slippers and moccasins and rubbers. Once outside, even in -40-degree weather, you were not let into the playroom to warm yourself unless you were crying and dancing, banging your feet on the ground when your toes were starting to freeze." But I think the fact that he describes it always seems to be winter is kind of a metaphorical phrase as well. Like he's using winter as a kind of symbol or a metaphor for how it felt to be in this environment. So it was a cold environment, not just by temperature wise, even though those are the conditions that they were uh, forced to endure in this -40 weather, but I think it's the atmosphere of this sterile, unfeeling, unnurturing environment where these children were brought up that is also very cold. So I think that's part of what he's trying to convey in this chapter. And he talks about the neglect of the children in the way that they're dressed. So the clothes or lack of clothes or lack of proper winter attire is another piece of evidence that tells us that the school system, uh, didn't really treat the children in the ways that showed care, right? It wasn't concerned about their welfare, their health. It didn't feed them, nutritious food, and in this case, they weren't given clothes that were proper for the weather. One pair of socks, one thin wool slippers, and again, scantily dressed for winter. So it tells us about the level of neglect and lack of care for the lives of the children who are in their under their authority. They were also inflicting corporal punishment or physical punishment on the students. And Sister St. Mercy is one of the nuns who Augie talks about, having scars left over from all the beatings that he endured at her hands and other of the abuse that he experienced. And he gives one anecdotal story where he was sleeping soundly and was woken up with blood streaming down his face. He thought he had lost his eye, and its Sister Mercy had strapped him in the face because she had thought he was giggling, but he was just maybe laughing in his sleep. And she causes his eye to bleed, and he could have lost his sight just because she didn't, she just heard a boy laughing and punished him for that. So it tells us like not just the severity of the punishment, but also the complete disregard for uh, the child's well-being. And she felt guilty and gave him a chocolate bar because of that. So again, we see bribery or the use of food as a kind of way to silence, or if they feel guilty about something, they try to make it up by giving the children food. And as he says, hit first and talk later. So she straps him against the face even before she even before she checks to see if he's sleeping or what's going on. So and then he talks about getting strapped every day before morning. 20 strokes, 10 to 20 strokes on the palms of your hands if you uttered any word or refused to hold out your hand to get the strapped. You got strapped on your head and shoulders until you fell on the floor pleading not to be struck anymore. And you had to promise to be of good behavior from then on. So always being strapped morning, noon, nighttime, um, with large straps, leather straps that these nuns used. It's interesting. One of the uh, recommendations made in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is a call that the criminal code, Canada's criminal code about spanking should be changed and it should be outlawed. So this is something that I think our society maybe needs to consider rethinking the criminal code based on the TRC's recommendation, but um, they recommend that corporal punishment of any kind, so any kind of physical hitting, strapping, beating of children is a relic of the past and should not be inflicted upon children in schools or homes. So I think we're it's definitely raises a question about punishments of children and whether or not this falls under the category of abuse when an authority figure, whether it's a parent or a teacher, uses physical discipline as a way to correct a child's behavior? Is spanking, should it be completely outlawed and criminalized? It brings up a very, controversial point, but I think it's something that maybe the TRC has brought to the attention of, Canadian society, and it's an interesting maybe move towards, completely ruling out against any spanking or any hitting of child, no matter what the situation. So I'm not a parent myself, and I don't pretend to know what needs to happen in terms of correcting children's behavior. But I do think this is an interesting question, a provocative question, and I think it's something that maybe you know uh, we need to talk about in our society about the extent of an adult's rights to hit a child. Is it ever justified? So yeah, if you want to weigh in the discussion forum, that would be kind of interesting as well. So if anybody has any opinions on this one, it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about how you guys feel about the Criminal Code of Canada that says every school teacher, parent, or person standing in place as a parent is justified in using force as a way of correction on children. Do you think it's justified? Would you change this law? And do you think it's a reasonable law under the circumstance that every adult who's in the authority of a parent is allowed to hit a child